Carmilla web series, written by Jordan Hall and Ellen Simpson and directed by Spencer Mabey, is a 2014 to 2016 Canadian adaptation of Joseph Sheridan LaFontain's 1872 novella Carmilla, modernizing the plot into a progressive, supernatural comedy drama incorporating elements from Harry Potter, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Welcome to Night Vale, Lonely Girl 15, and Sumerian mythology. It revises LaFontain's questionable portrayal of the lesbian vampire figure, largely interpreted as representing active lesbian sexuality, as a degenerate threat to innocent straight girls, into a feminist celebration of queerness and roguish vampiric kinkiness. The series is composed of 4 quote-unquote seasons, each consisting of short quote-unquote episodes, that together tell a plot similar to a full movie, but with a found film derivative framing device that allows for a delivery closer to a theatrical play, and a feature film was released in 2017. The first season was adapted into a young adult novelization by Kim Turisi in 2019, and other media items have been announced, including a graphic novel, theater adaptation, and primetime TV show, and the film at least gives the impression of a forthcoming sequel. The Season 1 plot suffers from its technical limitations and some iffy portrayals of non-binary transgendered transition, but generally, it's a strong modern feminist work.
We need to girl the hell up.
Simpson, who first suggested the idea of adapting Carmilla to a web series, wrote on her blog, "I first read Carmilla when I was in high school, and I didn't think much of it beyond finding the prose lovely and the story lacking. Laura and Carmilla both die, and you, the reader, are supposed to be at peace with this. But why do they have to die?" She wanted a queer-positive version of this strong lesbian vampire that predates Dracula, a version that celebrates her and her sexuality and contains no narrative punishment. She made a proposal, and Hall took over the bulk of the writing for all of the series but the third season, confusingly called Season 0, a breather between Season 2 and the confusingly named fourth season, Season 3, featuring a comedic flashback which Simpson wrote herself. Hall read the novella and was intrigued by LaFontain's treatment of female characters, realizing that she could spin it to make overtly feminist media. She was disappointed by a growing trend among young women to reject the label of feminist and wanted to make feminism popular among young women with fun feminist protagonists and a celebration of geek culture from the female perspective.
There was a time, maybe probably about 10 years ago, when there was sort of like a downtick in feminism, when you got a lot of the sort of reactionary things, which is like, I'm not a feminist. Especially from girls, coming up right past, I'm not a feminist. Boys don't like feminists.
Before the plot was all together, the band Souls was hired to write the series' theme song, Love Will Have Its Sacrifices, based purely on the original novella. They looked it over and found their own way to spin it as a progressive love story, notably taking the ominous line,
"Love will have its sacrifices. No sacrifice without blood,"
and turning it into an epic love story line. They also refer to the supposed avenging hero figure, General Spielsdorf, as the Demon of the Light. No way for you to hide from the demon of the light. He is purportedly good by his society standards, but is to be taken as monstrous if you view Laura and Carmilla as the real heroes being set upon by an oppressive male authority. Playwright David McDowell Blue did something similar with portraying him as a Nazi in his 2014 play version of Carmilla, and the web series would go in that direction in Season 2, but removed the male authority's presence in Season 1. Instead, the referenced Demon of the Light was reimagined into a secondary antagonist, Lofi Formes, a literal demon that produces light, loosely based on the Sumerian legend of the Galus, underworld demons. This character adds a Lovecraftian theme of intrigue that allows the rather short novella plot to be broadened and, by Season 3, transitioned into a retelling of Sumerian myth.
It was pretty cool you can read Sumerian.
1871 was a dull year.
The first season more or less retells the novella in modern times, while also being a loose sequel to it. The original trailer represents it as a pure sequel, saying that after the events of the novella, Carmilla has returned. But this doesn't quite stick in the series itself. The novella character of Laura is split into two characters: Laura Hollis in the present, played by Elise Bowman, and Elle in the past, portrayed in the movie by Dominique Provost-Chockley, as well as by Elise Bowman as Laura, experiencing psychic visions from Elle's perspective. While other characters like Bertha Reinfeldt, Carmilla's first victim in the novella, and Laura's governesses Madame Perrodon and Mademoiselle de LaFontaine, are specifically represented in the present setting. That setting is Silas University, a supposedly forward-thinking feminist college in isolated Styria, Austria, that is actually a dangerous haven for supernatural characters. A mix of Hogwarts and Sunnydale, or perhaps specifically, Buffy Season 4's UC Sunnydale, named for LaFontain's 1864 novel Uncle Silas. In a similar manner as Welcome to Night Vale's, sprinkling bizarre references to the occult, and a supposedly standard radio show, a whole series of creepy occurrences shows up on campus. The politics of the novella are ambiguous, but are certainly flawed from a modern perspective. Laura is passive and naive, and her life is continuously jerked around by her father and Carmilla both. She is preyed upon by a monster, implied to be a lesbian acting out of sexual aggression, and never finds relief, even when male authority figures kill Carmilla. She just apparently comes back and continues to stalk poor Laura, and is implied to kill and turn her in the end. She is a passive observer and has no power in the whole story.
Ugh.
However, in the web series, she is a spunky wannabe investigative reporter a la Lois Lane. Modern Laura represents the powerful feminist spirit of a common teenage girl raised on Veronica Mars and Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She's not merely the protagonist, she is an active hero figure. Her naivety is no longer a passive damsel trait, but an interesting character flaw of an overly sheltered, idealistic heroine. The vague hints in the novella of Laura's father being protective but distant are exaggerated in the web series to make him an overprotective survivalist enthusiast who loads Laura up on bear spray, that's a kind of pepper spray used on bears, and doesn't adequately prepare her for living in the real world.
Don't judge. My dad thought I'd use an iPhone to send high-resolution selfies to potential stalkers.
Though he is unseen in Season 1, they eventually casted Veronica Mars's dad, Enrico Colantoni, to play him in Season 3.
I've seen all of Veronica Mars.
Who's your daddy?
I wonder if she noticed the resemblance. For the most part, the production could be confused as American, but he has a distinctly Canadian element. Why? Because he's not nearly as extreme as an American survivalist would be. Pepper spray just isn't shocking to Americans.
The only thing I can think is that you're building a really little fence.
No, actually, it was for self-defense. Everyone has them in LA. Pepper spray is just so passé.
How do we feel about bear spray?
Probably not. Side note, you planning on invading a bear sanctuary?
Canadians, even when they're aggressive to a wacky degree, they're still so polite.
I'm sorry.
With her father's survivalist training and the ambition to prove herself, she enrolls in a journalism class taught by a reanimated Nellie Bly and starts a vlog as a class project. This forms the framing device of the series, derivative of Lonely Girl 15's faux vlog style. While Lonely Girl 15 is more realistic with shifting perspectives, as fit their initial presentation as a genuine vlog, before the content just became too outlandish to be real.
Who are you?
The Carmilla plot is constructed similarly to a play, with one frame looking into Laura's dorm room as a static webcam, an illusion created by sticking a video camera in one doorway of a two-door room, and never pretending to be anything other than a work of fiction. If the title sequence doesn't clue you in, Laura's narration of Silas's annual goat sacrifices and haunted library probably will. Each episode starts with a title card, alongside a loud instrumental of Love Will Have Its Sacrifices. The free version on YouTube has a white logo on a dark background, and the remaster pay version on VHX has a dark logo on a white background. While it makes sense to watch the episodes one after the other like scenes in a movie, the breaks to show the title and play the song really do help to break up the monotony. There have been fan cuts that remove the breaks, and it just doesn't work nearly as well. My one complaint is that the song is disproportionately loud, and it hurts my ears if I have the volume at a level entertainingly high for the dialogue scenes.
Wow, the Glee Club is really giving her, huh?
In the in-universe premise, though, the episodes are videos that Laura uploads onto the Silas Ethernet. We, the audience, take the perspective of Silas students, watching her life voyeuristically. It takes its cues from Lonely Girl 15, but doesn't commit in the show itself by not having Bowman's Laura respond to things that the fans say.
I read some of your guys' comments, and that really cheered me up. A lot of you think that Daniel and I should reconcile. I completely agree with you.
Or really imply that we're sharing the same universe. However, it does have transmedia extensions on social media sites, Twitter and Tumblr, where Simpson writes Laura and Carmilla, responding to fan input. Through the vlog, Laura introduces us to her roommate, Betty Spielsdorf, played by Grace Glowicki, a fun party girl who encourages Laura to stop working on homework and instead go out and have a good time. She's an entertaining character, but her name should raise a few eyebrows. Betty, sure, but Spielsdorf? What? This is an unsightly scene in the adaptation from 19th century Austrian aesthetic to modern Canadian aesthetic. In the novella, Laura looks forward to a visit from Bertha Reinfeldt, her only peer in Miles, and the ward of nobleman General Spielsdorf. But Bertha mysteriously dies before this can happen, and Carmilla takes her place as the object of Laura's affection. Of course, Carmilla turns out to have eaten Bertha, and General Spielsdorf returns at the end to take revenge. Betty's name looks like it might have come from confusion over Bertha's relation to General Spielsdorf, and bizarrely only anglicizes half of it. I would call her Betty Spencer or something like that. You might think, hey, isn't Silas set in Austria? And yeah, but I'm pretty sure this was a late addition to the story, not fully implemented. At one point, Carmilla tells Laura that Styria is in Austria, like she doesn't already know, being there at the time.
In Styria, a duchy of Austria.
It seems likely to me that Silas was conceived of as a Canadian institution and written that way in an early draft, and that this was poorly edited out in favor of the Austrian setting. It's now indicated in Transmedia that the students are from Canada and were lured to Silas because the local Styrians know better than to go near, which is also kind of the plot device used in Bram Stoker's Dracula. Unfortunately, the show itself doesn't make this clear.
Silas University, academic sanctuary in picturesque Styria.
And appears to have artifacts from earlier drafts, like Betty's name. Betty persuades Laura to go party, with mention of her being able to see someone that she likes. A teacher's assistant named Danny, with a Y. Danny is the diminutive form of Danielle, an Amazonian women's rights activist, played by Sharon Bell. But at this point, we're led to think that it's the diminutive of Daniel, and that the TA referenced is male. While Danny is an original character, her role as a pseudo-male love interest makes her resemble Carl from the 1970 film adaptation of Carmilla, the Vampire Lovers. A hetero bond to prove that Laura is straight, and that Carmilla is an invasive force that must be defeated to preserve heteronormativity.
Don't you wish some handsome young man would come into your life?
No, neither do you, I hope.
I'd like to see one. I wish Carl would come again. He's very handsome.
This is also somewhat derivative of novella Laura, fantasizing that Carmilla could be a romantic boy in disguise.
Was there here a disguise and a romance? I had read in old storybooks of such things. What if a boyish lover had found his way into the house, and sought to prosecute his suit in masquerade with the assistance of a clever old adventuress? But there were many things against this hypothesis, highly interesting as it was to my vanity.
The 1972 Carmilla adaptation, The Blood-Spattered Bride, lays out the politics plainly.
What are you implying, that Susan is a lesbian?
No, but she's being dominated by a lesbian.
Laura turning out to be gay, regardless of Carmilla's advances, is a subversion of that homophobia. Like with Angel being a vampire in Buffy, the twist that Laura is a lesbian is such an established premise at this point that the twist is barely understandable. When describing the series to someone who doesn't know what it is, the word lesbian is probably the first or second noun used after the title. Carmilla, a lesbian vampire web series. Or Carmilla, a web series about a lesbian vampire.
Do you remember what I said to you when you told me you were a lesbian?
Thank God you finally said it.
I can only imagine that when the series was being developed, they were just terrified of viewers rejecting it if Laura wasn't assumed to be straight. And that's a sad state of affairs. Considering that anyone can read a synopsis of the novella by Googling it, though, I'm not sure how many people they were likely to fool. It's not like Buffy being an entirely original property.
Tara's your girlfriend?
After a night of partying with her gender-neutrally named crush, Laura wakes up to find Betty mysteriously vanished. Her only clue is a lazily made official document stating that Betty left school overnight, covered in an unknown yellow liquid that starts growing mushrooms.
It is multiple choice!
This is derivative of the Buffy Season 4 premiere, The Freshman, in which a group of vampires abducts nervous new students and then pretends that they left out of fear, enabling the vampires to steal their stuff and remain under the radar. Likewise, Carmilla, played by Natasha Negovandlis, shows up as Laura's new roommate and proceeds to steal Betty's things while being obnoxious and low-key flirting with Laura. And this part is derivative of Buffy Season 4 Episode 2, Living Conditions, in which Kathy, a secretly demonic annoying roommate, makes Buffy crazy, literally. While Kathy is purely antagonistic, Carmilla's antagonism fulfills the romance movie trope of a love interest who is initially obnoxious, but later comes around. Unlike the novella, Carmilla is revealed to be a lesbian from the start. Even if it is fairly condescending, Carmilla flirts with Laura.
I'm your new roommate, sweetheart.
And then she annoys Laura by having sex with a girl, Elsie, in Laura's bed. And we're led to be pissed at her for being offensive like that, not for Carmilla being gay. That Carmilla's antagonistic sexuality is kept at the level of catty sniping greatly benefits the framing of lesbians as people who deserve respect, long before we get to Carmilla actually being sexually aggressive. This is in stark contrast to her behavior in the novella, where she stalks and grooms Laura from their first interaction, pretending to be a best gal pal. I think the change does a lot to bolster Laura's adaptational empowerment, where she can actively bicker with Carmilla instead of passively allowing her to lead their interactions.
I'm gonna find Betty, and you're gonna be out of here so fast there's gonna be scorch marks on those leather pants of yours.
Carmilla is an overtly dominant character, coded as such with her kinky leather ensembles, and while this is used for sex appeal, it is good that this isn't taken to an extreme degree. Laura should be able to stand as her equal in terms of roommate bickering. On the other hand, Laura problematically engages in sex-negative slut-shaming and gets revenge by telling Elsie that Carmilla has cold sores.
Guys, this is Dr. Jennifer Lang, a board-certified OBGYN.
Hey guys, the truth is if you're not immunocompromised or in the late stages of pregnancy, you really don't have to worry about it. Most sexually active adults are gonna be exposed to herpes at some point in their life. It's really not a big deal. That's what I tell my patients.
Laura starts to get an inkling that Carmilla isn't normal when she steals her soy milk, another reference to living conditions, and finds it filled with blood. In an allusion to lore of the novel having no clue that Carmilla is a vampire, despite a bunch of clues, until it's spelled out to her, web series Laura just thinks that Carmilla is a psycho. She reports it to the neurotic resident advisor, or as they say in Silas, the floor dawn, Lola Perry, played by Annie Briggs, a reference to the novella's Madame Perrodon, and her mad scientist BFF LaFontaine, or La for short, played by Caitlin Alexander, based loosely on both Mademoiselle de LaFontaine and the androgynous Asushu-Namir from Sumerian myth.
You're the biology major with the sampling obsession. And who doesn't want to be a girl anymore?
Dad, that's not... It's fine. It's less about the she and more about the they these days, Mr. Hollis.
Oh, of course. My apologies.
It can take some getting used to.
Yeah.
Yes, LaFontaine will be our transgender representation for this evening. Using they-them pronouns, both the character and actor are non-binary. Season 3 discusses this explicitly, and the Season 1 novelization uses the label genderqueer. However, it would appear that the same wariness the writers had over Laura's sexuality being overt keeps Loft's gender identity poorly explained in Season 1, with many fans not recognizing them as anything other than one more queer girl with a more butch presentation than the others. Perry calls them Susan, and they reject the name Susan and assert LaFontaine as their new name. It's gender neutral, but devoid of context. It just sounds like generic college reinvention. In fact, I have reason to believe that Teresi herself did not realize that LaFontaine was non-binary and made some sloppy last-minute edits. Teresi uses narrative pronouns inconsistently, sometimes misgendering Lof, and has Laura initially defend their name choice for reasons that have nothing to do with gender.
Do you ladies and not ladies?
I also think that LaFontaine, as a mad scientist archetype, is effectively written as autistic. I think this was completely unintentional, but they're composed of tropes that were originally developed through studying the traits and behaviors of autistic scientists. As such, they sort of provide autistic representation as well. No real complaints there. Lof sometimes gets carried away, but they might be the most reasonable person on the show.
A lot of problems can be solved through good communication.
A lot of problems can also be solved by taking hair and blood samples to figure out exactly what kind of freak it is you're dealing with.
Oh, wow. Oh, okay.
Perry is the rare case of a supposed straight man who is really the funny man. A normie so normal that she's absurd in this fantastic world. She rejects the blood in the milk container as a sign of anything weird going on, and also argues with Lof about their name choice. And here's where things get problematic. Lof's gender identity is presented as something weird that Perry rejects because she's normal, like the idea that Silas might not be like other schools. It's not normalized as valid queerness like the lesbian framing, at least not until the novelization throws in the retcon that Laura had a genderqueer friend in high school named Sam, completely outside the context of the Silas weirdness. In the web series, however, Laura is slower to accept Lof's gender identity than she is to accept that Carmilla is a vampire. Perry reveals that Betty is not the only girl to go missing. This has happened before, but the other girl showed up again, so she didn't see a real need to raise an alarm. Laura asks to speak with them, and Perry sends over the girls, Sarah Jane and Natalie, for Laura to interview. Carmilla happens to be in the room when this takes place.
Hey, don't I know you? From an intro class? I doubt it.
Sarah Jane says that all she knows is that she was at a party, she blacked out, then woke up in her dorm room, with people freaking out and saying that she was missing. Likewise, Natalie says that she was at a party, blacked out, and then woke up in a lecture hall days later. Carmilla ignores this interview until Natalie shares a mysterious nightmare about being stalked by a panther. That sounds a lot like the scene in the novella when Carmilla preys on Laura in a trippy sequence that involves her shapeshifting into a panther. So yeah, that's Carmilla's victim right there. Carmilla mocks and gaslights Natalie for thinking that her dream means anything by whistling the X-Files theme. Carmilla isn't just obnoxious, she is a cruel, violent, and petty person. Damn entertaining to watch, too. Natalie warns Laura about what we can determine to be Carmilla, and then runs out. Laura rounds on Carmilla and chews her out. The intensity of their conflict reaches the point that Laura delivers an insightful, scathing rant, condemning Carmilla for her use of apathetic cruelty as a coping mechanism. And I think it's implied that Carmilla starts to respect her. Played by Vietnamese-Canadian actress Lisa Truong, Natalie is, unfortunately, the only character of color in Season 1. Producer Steph Walkmeen has explained that when the Carmilla production was first starting out, they couldn't afford the use of unionized actors. Of the non-unionized actors available, the vast majority are white. They were happy to employ Lisa Truong, but didn't think that she was strong enough for a main role. The American production of the I Love Bees audio drama had a similar problem, with a whole scripted character of color needing to be changed from Indian to Italian from sheer lack of actor availability. In cases like this, I think it's reasonable to say that the lack of character diversity is a bad thing, but that no one is actually at fault for it. By the time they made season 2, they were able to afford to work with the union and introduced 3 new characters of color to bring diversity into the mix. When Laura publishes a video to warn students that there's a kidnapper on campus, she catches the ire of the scary dean, Lilita Morgan, named after Lila Morgan, a villain from the Buffy spin-off Angel, as well as a Sumerian legendary creature, the Lilitu, often interpreted as a vampire. Hint hint. She is mostly just referred to as the Dean. They didn't actually want to cast her for some reason, but she is haphazardly portrayed by Sharon Bell in one scene, where you can barely see her, and she possesses Laura later in the season to let Elise Bowman play her for a bit. The Dean calls an assembly to threaten whoever uploaded the video. Danny argues with her and accidentally starts a riot when her sorority, the Summer Society, named for Buffy Summers, clashes with a fraternity named Zeta Omega Mu, and angry feminists wanting safety for female students brawl with angry dude bros wanting free pizza. When they start throwing salted herring, Laura sneaks out and continues making videos while the Dean is distracted, much to the approval of Danny.
Meet Danny Lawrence.
Wait a minute, Danny's a girl?
I wouldn't say that I have an audience yet, but it is nice to have you here. Have you here.
Wait, Laura's a lesbian?
See, nobody cares.
The Zetas end up using the Summer's concerns to be their gross selves, deciding to offer a protection service for attractive female students as an excuse to harass them.
We made a vow as Zetas. If there's a hottie, we'll be on her.
Sounds chivalrous.
Totally.
2 Zetas, Will, played by Aaron Chartrand, and Kirsch, played by Matt O'Connor, harass Laura until Carmilla comes home and has far less patience. She first lashes out at Laura for supposedly encouraging them, and then goes after the Zetas when they persist in annoying her, displaying her antagonistic vampire nature.
Oh, look at these. Such arms, such shoulders. The primitive by way of the neoclassical.
Yeah, well, I work out.
I could just eat you alive.
Oh, whoa. Ah, biting! Oh, ow! Oh, whoa!
Natasha Negovanlis puts on a weird voice for this scene, and a few others in season 1. I think she was experimenting with Carmilla's old age showing through, or maybe doing an aggressive cat voice, but it winds up as like a cross between the Wicked Witch of the West from Wizard of Oz and Old Lorraine in Back to the Future Part 2.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
Hydrate level 4, please. What? It was barely a nip.
Carmilla mocks them for thinking that girls are weak, but it falls flat as a feminist gotcha when she's only strong because she happens to be a vampire. And, she has a long history of preying on weak girls. So, yeah. Danny and Laura tackle the vanished girls case, while Carmilla keeps an eye on them. A new development occurs. Natalie no longer cares about it. Her worries are behind her. She has a completely different personality. Now a party girl who acts drunk and talks about table dancing. Also, Sarah Jane now hangs off of Kirsch and also acts like she's drunk. In other words, they sound like Betty when Laura knew her. Laura does some digging and finds out that Betty used to be a nerdy, high academic achiever. Also, her full name is Elizabeth Ann Spielsdorf, a reference to Buffy Ann Summers. Do you think that Hall likes Buffy? Laura wasn't actually friends with the real person. That is horrifying. And so, the real pattern of disappearances comes into focus. A nerdy girl goes to a party, vanishes, shows up later with no memory of the event, turns into a party girl, and then vanishes again and doesn't come back. That is so strange, it could only happen at Silas. It suggests that Betty is in real danger, and Laura needs to solve the mystery soon to rescue her. Meanwhile, things with Carmilla cool. She's still catty, but only passive-aggressive, not aggressive-aggressive. She confuses Laura by being both nice and mean at the same time. Like she can't quite bring herself to commit to being nice. She actually pays Laura a compliment, while stealing her hot chocolate. In a delightful homage to a minor part of the novella where Carmilla appears to her human hosts to mostly subsist of hot chocolate and coffee, Carmilla web series vampires love hot chocolate.
Say what you will about the Germans, they know their chocolate.
When the dean shows up, sort of, and chews out Carmilla for somehow disappointing her, Laura listens in and gets a sadistic thrill from it.
Schadenfreude isn't very attractive, Laura.
But so satisfying.
I like that Laura can be a little mean, a little catty to match Carmilla's cattiness, in contrast to her super sweet, innocent characterization in the novella and Vampire Lovers. It makes her more human and more of a match for Carmilla, herself a very flawed character.
You shall meet your match, an annoying shrill of a girl, one who truly challenges you.
However, when she sees Carmilla actually suffering, Laura becomes sympathetic and consoles her, putting in an effort to be friendly. Carmilla honestly appreciates it, and they effectively make up. This allows for their eventual romance to be based on mutual respect that after their initial discord, they earned. Danny shows up at Laura's dorm with a new tool to help. A secret surveillance network set up by the Alchemy Club with mutant fungus, which provides them with footage of all of the parties the abducted girls attended before their vanishings. The Alchemy Club is never featured on screen, but Danny calls them creepy, and there's a recurrent joke about the fungus on campus, building to an off-screen battle against a mushroom takeover and zombie students. An homage to The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. Because Laura references the mysterious yellow liquid growing mushrooms, the Alchemy Club is used as a red herring perpetrator, but they turn out to be unrelated and more annoying than the real threat, represented by the vampires. Danny and Laura study the footage for hours before making a breakthrough. Carmilla was at each party the girls disappeared at. Each time, she appears to have a specific interest in the abducted girl. She is definitely involved somehow. Fortunately, she couldn't care less about Laura's journalism project, so Laura is free to use her camera to spy on Carmilla and look for clues. Now, after calling the Alchemy Club surveillance network creepy, one might think the show would use this to commentate on Laura's ethical ambiguity, but disappointingly, this begins a trend of Laura behaving in an outlandishly intrusive way that is accepted because she's a hero and is never criticized for it. Similar to the novella having Laura experience numerous clues that Carmilla is a vampire, and not get it until General Spielsdorf finally says it, Laura records Carmilla doing a lot of vampiric things and doesn't get it. She knows that Carmilla's sleep schedule is nocturnal. Because the novella was written before 1922's Nosferatu pioneered the sun-killing vampires, sunlight itself isn't a problem. Aside from stealing Laura's snacks, Carmilla appears to only consume the blood in the milk container. And she starts a fire with her mind, an unusual vampire power that even the novella doesn't give her. The fire in question is to destroy a Christian rock record, in reference to a scene in the novella where a funeral hymn weakens Carmilla. Aside from this one hard-to-understand shot, and a brief reference to Perry being Jewish, the series is remarkably secular. LaFontaine even says they're an atheist.
I'm an atheist.
Even Buffy and Angel weren't that bold. Laura learns enough to know that Carmilla is suspicious and dangerous. And Carmilla suddenly gives her a gift, a creepy batwing bracelet for good luck. Laura isn't sure how to take it. It seems gross and like it could be an insult, but then Carmilla smiles and flirts like she expects it to be well received. It's kind of an Addams Family moment, where Laura's mundaneness clashes with Carmilla's gothic outlandishness. The actors do a great job of projecting their characters' feelings to the audience, while presumably not to each other in-universe. Laura is slightly flattered by Carmilla's flirtation, including her seduction eyes, but creeped out by the bracelet and thinks that it's a sign that Carmilla may be targeting her for the next abduction. This scene is based on a scene in the novella where Carmilla's vampiric nature is hinted at when a traveling salesman references a vampire in the area and sells Laura and Carmilla snake oil charms to ward off said vampire. Carmilla insists that Laura take one to give her a false sense of security. The web series twists this to make Laura well aware of the danger Carmilla poses, if not the extent, and view the charm with suspicion. Carmilla's motives are as yet unclear, but we'll eventually learn that they're not quite as malicious as her novella counterpart. Laura finds a picture on a campus wall that appears to depict Carmilla looking exactly as she does now from several decades prior, and with a different name that's an anagram of Carmilla. This is a reference to a scene in the novella where an ancient portrait is restored and reveals an identical visage to Carmilla in the form of Countess Mircalla Karnstein. And Laura, in either version, still doesn't realize that Carmilla is a vampire. Locke and Laura do research at the haunted library, where a ghost possessing the computer system helps them out before the library itself attacks them. What they actually do in the library is all described by the protagonist to the vlog webcam after the fact, in an example of the show's play-like exposition. It's a common theater trope. It's just hard for a play production to feature every setting without a large budget. Some productions get around this by having a static backdrop so abstract that it can stand in for a variety of settings, with the legwork being done by the audience's imagination. But this isn't something that Carmilla could reasonably do with its commitment to the realistic single frame. The actors have to carry the exposition, and when they're just covering simplistic human drama, they do so well enough. But when they describe fantastic action scenes, it becomes annoying that they tell instead of show. This scene is made more effective than it would otherwise be by having papers from the library flutter with their paranormal animation, making the scene livelier than it would otherwise be, but at the end of the day, it's just characters looking at the camera and talking like it's an episode of Sesame Street.
What is the Sesame Street number of the day?
And that gets old fast. With their research, Laura knows that Carmilla is ancient, retains the same appearance, and shows up at Silas every 20 years, under a different anagram alias. At the same time she does so, a bunch of girls go missing. Laura runs through all the weird things that they know about Carmilla, finally about to suggest that she may be a vampire, when Loft just says it.
Well, yeah, but we know she's a vampire. I mean, we've known that since the blood in the milk container, right? Vampire, 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 yeah?
I love this part. It's especially funny in light of the novella, making Laura so obtuse. Like, yeah, duh, she's a vampire. Perry is too normal to accept it, but the other protagonists gear up to fight a vampire. When Danny hears that Carmilla hit Laura with her seduction eyes, she jealously gets gung-ho about the idea of killing her.
Staking, decapitation, immolation. There's something here about driving an iron needle through her heart. You know, normally I'm not into this kind of stuff, but in the case of seduction eyes, I could definitely warm up to the thought.
This is played for comedy, but is a serious matter in talking of killing a romantic rival. Though her aggression is ultimately portrayed with a realistic edgy tone in Season 2, her yandere efforts to secure Laura's affection are never properly called out as problematic. Loft suggests not being speciesist against Carmilla just for being a vampire, but agrees that Laura's life may be in danger and, in an absence of campus authorities willing to intervene, supports them taking violent action against Carmilla, if only so that she can be interrogated.
We need a way to get some answers.
I mean, they can interrogate Carmilla whenever they want. They can wait until she comes home and ask her questions until the sun comes up. Maybe she'd be willing to answer honestly, maybe not, but they can try without taking any kind of violent... Oh, yeah. Let me start over. Loft supports taking violent action against Carmilla so she can be tortured. Yeah, that's what they're really talking about. And yeah, it's speciesist. Just because Carmilla is a vampire, they consider her not really a person and worth abusing. And no, they never get properly criticized for thinking this way, even in Morally Complex Season 2.
Give me the name of the person!
Even though it's Canadian, it's hard to think that this doesn't have something to do with American culture's embrace of torture in the Bush years.
The Bush administration also chose to disregard the judgment of a top advisor who warned that the CIA's interrogation of terror suspects equated to felony war crimes. According to a secret memo obtained by Wired magazine, in 2006, State Department counselor Philip Zelikow warned the White House that controversial interrogation techniques such as waterboarding, stress positions, and cramped confinement are prohibited under U.S. law. And under American law, there is no precedent for excusing treatment that is intrinsically cruel, even if the state asserts compelling need to use it.
LaFontaine suggests that Laura reciprocate Carmilla's advances and bait her into a trap. This deception allows Laura to get into the role of someone interested in Carmilla and enables her to fall for her for real, serving a similar function of the trope where two undercover agents have to pretend to be lovers. In going through the motions, it gets them to start thinking that they might want to do it for real, and it builds sexual tension. Laura's baiting of Carmilla is one-sided, but still builds tension in a manner parallel to Carmilla's own stalking and sexual dominance in both novella and web series. Carmilla seduces her in a standard sexy dominant monster fashion by scaring her and being there to flirt when she's on edge, and looks to Carmilla for comfort. She does the thing where she turns into a panther and terrorizes Laura at night in a trippy dream sequence that we only hear about after the fact. Vampire Lovers is also minimalistic, but at least they show something. At the same time, Lofi Formes projects nightmares into Laura's head involving bright light and a crying girl, Elle. Carmilla seems aware of these dreams and possibly able to influence them. Her panther form is front and center, and Laura suffers the experience of drowning in blood, which comes straight from Carmilla's trauma. Carmilla cheerfully describes suffering the same blood nightmare as a means of teasing her, like she could see it. Possibly that she could have made that part, but couldn't see Elle. This makes Carmilla an edgy love interest. She's not just a girl who happens to be a vampire and appears to have something to do with the abductions. She is an active, sexually aggressive threat to our protagonist. This builds both sexual tension and apprehension in her construction as a femme fatale villain. Death and love together made it. Her stalking has a very deliberate pacing for both horror and eroticism. She makes Laura tense and then backs off, makes her tense and then backs off. She fills the pauses with gentle flirtation. After a particularly scary nightmare in which Laura wakes up screaming about a panther, Carmilla lays the seduction on thick, with a soulful contemplation of humanity's place in the universe. The scene has great atmosphere, with Carmilla assuming a smug, gothic dominance, after literally coalescing from a pillar of black smoke in the background. It's scary, but also romantic and kind of sweet the way she flirts. I practically expect to hear sexy saxophone music in the background. Laura plays the role of the submissive paramour that Carmilla expects and that Laura's novella counterpart more or less was, but with the difference that web series Laura is overtly a lesbian and could reasonably be expected to be interested in Carmilla's advances, making it more of a consensual basis to their romance than the interactions of their novella counterparts. Of course, we know that Carmilla is stalking Laura, and Laura is tricking Carmilla, so we have that subtext to give the scene tension and make it more interesting than the simple cliché of a sexually dominant vampire romancing a sexually submissive human. However, like with the undercover couple trope, Laura playing the role does allow her to get into the role, and the show explores this for sex appeal, even if it ultimately doesn't commit to the premise. Laura invites Carmilla to a Zeta party, where all her friends and some Zetas will jump her, and she gets ready by dressing like vampire bait. The wide neckline allowing easy biting access could be the vampire equivalent of a miniskirt. However, Carmilla decides to assert her dominance and keep Laura off guard, so she arranges a date in the dorm room. Thank goodness! It'd be awful to hear about this scene afterward in exposition. What follows is a delightful scene where Carmilla lays the seductive dominance on thick while keeping Laura trapped, scaring her, and also being effective at seducing her. Elise Bowman does an amazing job portraying Laura's fear, apprehension, and growing attraction as she flips back and forth between, oh my god, she wants to eat me, and wow, this is so flattering! With mundane Laura being blown away by Carmilla's extravagance, and showing great comedic poses as she tries to deal with Carmilla trapping her and getting overly familiar. Natasha Negu-Vanlis plays Carmilla completely straight as the sexy dominant vampire, so then they function well together as a comedic duo, like a romantic version of Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein.
There's something about you.
Maybe it's my keen fashion sense.
No, it's definitely not that.
That is hilarious, and also a Buffy reference.
Merrick, I'm not gonna croak that easily. I have something that the other girls didn't have.
And what might that be, pray?
My keen fashion sense.
Before Laura can receive the vampire's kiss, Danny shows up to rescue her, and a nice lesbian twist on the male love interest rescuer characters in Dracula and Vampire Lovers. One off-screen fight scene later, they successfully get Carmilla tied to a chair with her mouth taped shut, similar to the treatment of Spike in Buffy Season 4, and also Jonas in Lonely Girl 15. They seem to have managed what novella Laura could not, successfully restraining Carmilla without any help from mundane authority or her father. After Carmilla defined herself in sexual dominance and tried to put Laura in the box of sexual submission, Laura turned the tables and now holds herself as dominant while humiliating Carmilla in a state of bondage that she is literally broadcasting for all of Silas to gawk at. The fact that Laura is laughably new at this only furthers Carmilla's humiliation.
All right, vampire. We know that you've been stalking those girls, and we know that you're a vampire. So the sooner you fess up and tell us what's going on, the better this is going to go for you, because we have got a spatula and a stapler, and we are not afraid to use them, so you better start singing.
Laura, she's still got the...
Oh, right. Maybe this will get you talking.
This is the crack team that foils my every plan. I am deeply shamed.
Laura starts the interrogation. Carmilla plays innocent.
Look, if I were really a vampire, would I just stay here tied up, proclaiming my innocence as some sort of trick?
Yeah, that's completely exactly what a vampire would do.
Now, that's funny, but it's also a ripoff of a joke from Buffy. In Season 3, Episode 16, Doppelgangland, Willow goes undercover as a vampire, saying that she'll scream if she's found out, and when the villains start to catch on, she pretends to offer evidence that she's really a vampire by screaming, and then reinforcements show up while the villains are confused.
A human? Oh yeah, could a human do this?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think, yeah.
do that, yeah.
This is the same joke backwards, where it's a vampire would do that instead of humans do that. It's not that I don't like nods to Buffy, but I would hope that Carmilla could stand as its own thing. To an extent it does. The seduction scene is hilarious without being a ripoff, besides that one keen fashion sense reference. But the writers don't commit to this and make lazy ripoffs like this one. This isn't just a reference, it's ripping off the formula of the joke. Carmilla eventually admits that she's a vampire, but insists that she had nothing to do with the kidnappings. Loff advocates for her, especially when a girl goes missing while Carmilla is restrained, but still goes along with Laura's wacky torture plan when she decides to hold Carmilla for 2 weeks and starve her until she tells her side of the story.
Keep your hair tied up, watching her every second? Starving her until she confesses?
How about I do anyway?
It is effective at subverting the vampire dominance trope, and it empowers Laura, so I like that aspect of it, but think that the show problematically ignores how Laura herself takes on the role of abusive dominance, even in Season 2.
What? No, we're rehearsing a skit. Yeah, the torture scene from Arsenic and Old Lace. Mm-hmm. Yep, there's a torture scene. Want more info? Buy tickets.
Oh hey, the T word. Finally, Carmilla starts to go into a hunger-induced seizure, and Laura gives in and feeds her in a burst of empathy. Now that Carmilla has dropped her guard a little, Laura is able to talk to her and build rapport. Carmilla reveals that she wasn't actually trying to eat Laura, just seduce her, which flatters her. It's an interesting development from the novella, where Carmilla's attraction to Laura is initially distinct from a desire to eat her, until she runs out of other girls to eat, and then blurs the two predatory actions together. In the web series, Carmilla never runs out of her food source, which is left vague, but is implied to be exactly what you'd expect. And her stalking of Laura is always of a purely sexual nature. When Laura shifts the dynamic, the ground is fertile for a more egalitarian romance. Carmilla agrees to tell her side of the story.
All right then, buckle up, cream puff. We're gonna be in for a long night.
We run into the play exposition problem again, so the scene is made more interesting by Laura deciding to embarrass Carmilla with a sock puppet reenactment of her tragic backstory, mocking her vampiric dignity. It's a bit mean, but in a way that's ultimately harmless, in contrast to Carmilla's cruelty. Born as Countess Mircalla Karnstein in 1680 or so, she was murdered at a ball in 1698 by a powerful ancient female vampire she refers to as Mother, also known to Laura as the Dean. Like Lestat to Louis, she showed Carmilla the vampiric mystique, having a glorious time partying and, massacring. Yeah, Carmilla glosses over that part, but they're definitely immortal serial killers.
We're vampires. A certain amount of murder just comes with the territory.
Carmilla doesn't necessarily kill to eat.
I didn't kill anyone. Maddie and I just had a little fun.
But she doesn't necessarily refrain either.
A holiday where you can't kill people is a stupid holiday.
Every 20 years, the two of them go to Styria, where they partake in a strange ritual where the Dean gathers up a bunch of girls and does something mysterious with them. She uses Carmilla to attract these girls, and then the Dean does her thing. The general events of the novella were one instance of this practice, where the Dean dropped Carmilla off at a schloss to make friends with Elle and to collect her for the Dean. Instead of General Spielsdorf or another male authority getting in the way, there was a clash between women. Carmilla fell for Elle and was going to run away with her when the Dean found out and took her revenge by making Elle hate Carmilla by seeing her as a monster, before taking Elle herself and then trapping Carmilla in a coffin filled with blood, where she remained until World War II bombing inadvertently freed her. The Dean found her again, and their practices resumed. Carmilla now plays nice, but takes out her revenge in petty ways, intentionally botching the job where she can, and scaring girls back home where the Dean can't get to them.
Did you help Betty?
No.
So, someone that she knew, someone that she thought was her friend, was really a vampire, and they took her for your mother.
Yes.
Wow. That's pretty... Wow. There is a lot to consider there. Firstly, this is basically the novella from Carmilla's untold perspective, with no male authority, and the ending changed. Her mother is there in the book as an ostensible French noblewoman who sets up Carmilla's stay at Laura's schloss by tricking Laura's father. It's unclear if she has any actual authority in her relationship with Carmilla, if she's at all related to her, or if she might be Carmilla's minion. There is also an entourage of what are implied to be undead servants, and a racist caricature of a black woman, referenced by the name Matska. As a lie of omission, to keep some measure of power over Laura, web series Carmilla never indicates that there was anyone in the vampire group other than her and the Dean. But undead servants are referenced later in the season.
Zombies will eat your liver, blah, 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 blah.
And a much more respectful version of Matska shows up in season 2.
Call me Maddie.
Of course, in the novella, Carmilla's actions are purely malicious. Even if she loves Laura in her own twisted way, and feels some regret over being a predatory vampire, she still pulls off the trick, stalks and feeds on Laura, and would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling men, General Spielsdorf, Wardenberg, Laura's father, and an unnamed doctor, who figure out that Carmilla is a vampire, track her down to her place of rest, a coffin filled with blood, a la Elizabeth Bathory's rumored rejuvenation method, and do everything in their power to kill her. In the horrific twist ending, it's implied that Carmilla, and/or her entourage, comes back and succeeds in killing Laura. The reader is left disturbed. In the web series version, Carmilla is a predatory vampire with a heart of, well, silver. She is undoubtedly a serial killer, but deeply sympathetic, to an extent that is denied her novella counterpart. She is capable of love in the sense of wanting the other party to be benefited, even if it's against her own interests.
I heart you so much. No, I heart you so much.
She wanted Elle to be unaware of Carmilla's vampirism, not merely as a trick, but because Carmilla cared what Elle thought of her. She would be willing to run away with her, if not for the actions of oppressive authority. Here transposed from a bunch of men to the Dean, not merely seeking to vamp her, and essentially marry her against her will. She is much more sympathetic. The replacement of the male authority with the Dean further emphasizes the feminine focus of the web series and enhances the feminist themes. Pushing back against a male authority is fine, but ladies,
And not ladies.
fighting ladies, allows for a greater display of feminine power and isolates Carmilla as a story centered on women and not women. It doesn't have a male focus is what I'm saying. Laura's blood nightmare is now put into context as a peek into Carmilla's psyche.
I was in my room, and there was something in my bed. Something under my bed. This dark, prowling thing without a face. And then it was this little girl crying. I tried to pull the blankets over my face to hide, but the darkness started seeping through them like blood more and more until I was drowning in it.
The fact that Carmilla indicates that she didn't subvert the Dean's wishes in luring Betty is a powerful note. She is villainous in her actions, fitting cleanly into the role as antagonist in Laura's story, and yet is still sympathetic. She regrets what she did and hates disappointing Laura as she once hated horrifying Elle, and Laura can see that and respect her. This is significant as a plot point. Laura can respect and fall for a murderous vampire because of this deep, moving moment in his supernatural drama. So it's disappointing to me that the novelization changes it to make both Laura and Carmilla more sympathetic to the reader. Laura doesn't torture Carmilla, just ties her up, and Carmilla doesn't care that much, even quipping about how she would want Laura to dominate her in bed. Laura puts on the puppet show to amuse Carmilla, not embarrass her, and Carmilla doesn't obscure that there are other vampires, so that she can say that Betty was someone else's responsibility, and Carmilla is not to blame at all. This defanging ruins a pivotal scene. It is important that both are mean, and that Carmilla is villainous except for her regret, so Laura can come to like her in spite of them being enemies.
She just confessed to centuries of tricking girls into being her friend before she ate them.
Now that Laura likes Carmilla more, she tries to be a polite captor by both feeding her and letting her watch TV. In a goofy attempt to appeal to Carmilla's interests, she plays Twilight and the Vampire Diaries. Carmilla doesn't like them, but actively engages with the content by complaining about how the leads are not acting like real vampires, by showing emotion and falling in love with their food.
Vampires don't cry? It's almost as bad as that sparkly twerp.
It's funny, but it's also a bit anti-feminist, and inconsistent with Carmilla's character. The whole debate of the sexy Byronic vampire versus the ugly animalistic vampire is fundamentally sexist and homophobic. The toxic male gatekeepers of vampire fandom don't like how Byronic vampires appeal to female demographics and scream about how they're gay, effeminate, and not real vampires. Vampires like Edward Cullen are treated like right-wing men treat left-wing men, yelling about how eating soy has feminized them, and how Western culture needs to return to oppressive patriarchal standards where men are men. Anti-Twilighters often hold up Count Dracula as a model of what a real vampire looks like, not realizing that he doesn't burn in the sun in the book, and saying things like, fake vampires sparkle, real vampires burn. The whole sparkling thing being hated so much comes from its association with femininity, and it's just a big toxic masculine kerfuffle.
The Cullen clan is a peaceful bunch. On human blood they refuse to munch, but a real vampire would have a hunch. You'd never fall in love with your high school lunch.
Yeah, because vampire stories have nothing to do with love. It's not like vampires have any kind of association with forbidden desire. And hey, it's not like Carmilla as an enduring vampire character is defined by her attraction to people. Why is this malarkey in a Carmilla show?
You're a vampire, numbnuts. Eat her. Pop culture has so much to answer.
As it turns out, Will is one of those vampires Carmilla failed to mention. Considering that he helped restrain her, it does put it into question if Laura, Danny, Loff, and Kirsch could do the job on their own. His motives for doing so are unclear, possibly to let Carmilla examine the extent of the anti-vampire sentiment on campus, so that once he could release her, they could act against it together. As Carmilla has been shown to be able to turn into black smoke, this has led some fans to speculate that Carmilla was faking her captivity the whole time, a la Black Widow.
I'm in the middle of an interrogation. This moron is giving me everything.
But the fact that Will has to release her, and Season 2 also depicts her in effective bondage, leads me to suspect that the writer simply forgot about this power. Also, the setting things on fire thing never comes up again. Laura wakes up, and Will starts stalking her. Carmilla watches neutrally, like maybe she isn't sure where her loyalty lies, and just wants to see how this plays out. It turns out that Laura's father made her take Krav Maga classes, so she can defend herself, and they duke it out off-screen in the bathroom. Krav Maga is a well-respected Israeli martial arts style, and it's not unusual to be featured as a fighting style an individual might know. But I do attribute some feminist significance to the fact that the Israeli military is noteworthy for its acceptance of female fighters. In a sense, it makes Laura like Danny as a feminist who can fight.
Tell me at least you two pack some heat.
I know Krav Maga. I am a weapon.
General sounds of pain are heard from both parties. Carmilla smiles, but she stops smiling when Will wins, and she urges him to release Laura. He doesn't want to, so Carmilla intervenes. Believing Carmilla to be on her side, Laura dives behind her and cowers. Carmilla accepts this role as dominant protector for the moment, and Will, in a cute nod to sibling dynamics, runs to their mother to tell on her. The vampire speed effects here aren't much better than in Nosferatu, but at least there's a bit of a gradual ramping up and some motion blur to make it more believable. Laura relaxes, not realizing that Carmilla is a dangerous vampire who is now free and has a bone to pick with her. Carmilla moves like she might kiss Laura, but instead forcefully bites her, drinks her fill, and then runs after Will. There is a sexual component to biting, and Carmilla essentially sexually dominated Laura to assert that she does not get to dominate Carmilla.
You are mine. You shall be mine. You and I are one. Forever.
There is a lot of kinky interplay between Laura and Carmilla, at least early on, where they fight for dominance, and each assume the submissive role at different times. The concept of the switch, a person who can be either dominant or submissive in different contexts, has largely evaded notice of the fan community, and a popular fan debate is on which one is truly the dominant one and which is truly submissive, with the main theory being that Carmilla, for all her sexy dominant monster bluster, is the truly submissive one, and Laura, the true dominant one.
If we ever shared a bunk bed, how long would it take for you to surrender and give me the top bunk?
I would never surrender. I like being on top.
Whoa.
That's all.
However, the popular use of the terms top and bottom that can mean dominant and submissive, but are interchangeable with sex positions, leads to a great deal of annoyance among lesbians who don't like that sex positions are equated with personality. The great top or bottom debate is associated with porn made for straight men that puts forward the idea that lesbians fit hetero roles, with the top as essentially a stand-in for a man, and the bottom essentially a stand-in for the woman. While there are dominant and submissive lesbians, as there are dominant and submissive everyone, lesbians shouldn't be assumed to fit strict top and bottom definitions, as in porn, and the general fan analysis of Laura and Carmilla does tend to stem from that. And Season 3 in the movie notably depict them switching between the top and bottom sex positions in a purely vanilla dynamic. That is all well and good, but I think competitive dominance and submission interplay is the only way to read their interactions early on, before their relationship develops into something more vanilla. Carmilla is a sexy dominant monster in the novella, with her whole
And with gloating eyes she drew me to her, and her hot lips traveled along my cheek in kisses, and she would whisper, almost in sobs, "You are mine. You shall be mine. You and I are one forever."
thing. And that comes out in the web series with her leather dyke outfits, and generally dominating behavior, and movie flashbacks of her stalking Elle. Vampires being sexually dominant is such a common portrayal that it's more noteworthy when they're not. Vampires are really just a plot device for featuring BDSM without the scandal of being overt about it. The Carmilla novella essentially defined the lesbian vampire as sexually dominant of her female courtship object, and the web series plays with this by making Carmilla capable of being dominated herself. That said, the point that Laura and Carmilla represent a healthy lesbian relationship because they switch back and forth between top and bottom isn't just relevant to sex positions. The way the web series' dominance play dissolves the one-sided nature of novella Carmilla's dominance is also healthy. Carmilla dominates Laura, Laura dominates Carmilla, Carmilla dominates Laura again. It's kinky, but serves the function of establishing boundaries. Once Carmilla bites Laura, it's clear that she's done playing the submissive role, but after that point, she maintains a respectful distance. Laura backs off, so Carmilla respectfully backs off as well. In this way, they establish a reasonably healthy middle ground on which they can build their relationship, even if it is born of violence. Laura examines her wound. It's worth noting that Carmilla has 2 fangs, despite confusion where the second bite mark is obscured by Laura's hair in the main shot. The fang effect was not used in the series until the movie to avoid fang-speak. The fact that the novella has some confusing wording about her teeth, one guy saying 1 tooth and describing it as like an awl, a tool for piercing leather, has led to the misconception that Carmilla has 1 single fang, but the truth is that she has a proper dual set in both the novella and the web series. And with that lovely awl image in mind, ow! Carmilla fails to catch up with Will and wants to skip town to avoid the fallout, but Laura persuades her to stay. Now, finally on an equal level, they can build their relationship. When Perry sees that Carmilla is loose, she runs to get Danny, who tries to attack Carmilla again. Carmilla doesn't let her. Laura pleads with Carmilla not to hurt her, and she releases her as a favor to Laura. Carmilla holds the power, but respects Laura, and only Laura, and she doesn't harm Laura's friends out of that respect. This is the decisive moment where Laura effectively chooses Carmilla over Danny, because Danny refuses to respect Carmilla as Laura does. So, of course, the novelization ruins it by making everybody nicer and making it confusing why Laura rejects Danny. Though it's not made explicit until the novelization, it's implied that Laura has been selected as a potential target. That is presumably why she has been having the Lofi Formes dreams. The Batwing bracelet was a charm to make her unappealing to vampires, in the hopes that they would ultimately select someone else. Unlike her novella counterpart, Carmilla's gift of the charm is benign, and a sign that she genuinely likes Laura and wants to keep her safe. When Perry sees Laura playing nice with Carmilla, despite having a bite mark, she starts a series of emotional outbursts, in which she shows that she's not coping well with becoming aware that Silas is as weird as it is.
Be normal. Just be normal!
It's funny, yeah, but she rejects LaFontaine's gender identity as part of the weirdness.
Like this nonsense where you won't even let me call you Susan anymore.
I don't want to be Susan anymore.
Well, that's too bad because she was my friend. I don't even know who you are anymore.
She storms off, and LaFontaine is left stunned. Laura looks sympathetic, but doesn't get involved. Perry is being transphobic and rejecting LaFontaine's honest gender identification and insisting on the feminine name that they reject, what is known in the trans community as dead naming, a bitter insult. Perry mistakenly conceptualizes of her friend as previously having been a woman named Susan, who then took on a non-binary secondary personality named LaFontaine, when the truth is that they were only ever non-binary, and their rejection of their feminine birth name is done as a process of self-actualization. Her association of Loft's asserted gender identity with the weirdness of Silas is a transphobic denial of non-binary identity, making it out to be as fantastic as the existence of vampires. The association with being weird could be used as an example of queerness. Being queer is being true to oneself, despite the arbiters of normativity asserting it isn't normal as invalid. Perry could be positioned as an antagonist in a queer positive show, but she's not. She is portrayed as equally sympathetic as LaFontaine. When fans characterized Perry as transphobic, Ellen Simpson rejected this interpretation and indicated that LaFontaine has yet to properly transition by telling Perry what they want. This strikes me as disingenuous. Perry doesn't just slip and deadname LaFontaine out of habit. She actively denies Loft's identification. That's transphobic even if she is sympathetic. And pinning LaFontaine's lack of clarity on the character being nervous or whatever when this internal conflict isn't shown explicitly in the show is just an excuse for the writers shying away from framing Loft as trans in the foreground. Season 2 will have them reference discussing pronouns with Perry, like they get over their supposed resistance to properly transitioning.
Pear's gone to see if anybody at the student paper knows what's going on, which means that I get a break from the "what pronouns do we use if" interrogations.
But there's still no explicit framing of them as trans, such that an ignorant viewer could understand until Season 3. Yeah, this is just transphobia. It is a blemish on an otherwise progressive, queer, feminist show. The fact that they play coy with Loft even being transgender obscures the politics of it. It looks a lot like Perry is just getting upset that Loft, a woman, changed her name. Laura's neutral reaction allows for fans to sympathize with Perry to a problematic extent. Perry doesn't have a valid point, but you wouldn't know it from the framing. This is the rare case where the novelization is better than the source material. After Perry deadnames LaFontaine, Laura becomes furious on their behalf and stands up to her, asserting the validity of their gender identity. Finally, the right framing. Shortly after Teresi accidentally refers to Loft with a female pronoun. Why wasn't this thing edited? One of the weird Silas events is an incident occurring in 1874 where a boy named JP vanished in the school library while trying to research the vampire cult. The haunted computer catalog turns out to be his ghost or trapped soul or something, based loosely on Laura's Schloss in the novella being haunted and a random ghost getting a line of dialogue. When raiding the library for information on the ritual, LaFontaine rescues JP from the library computer by transferring him onto an external hard drive and loading him on Laura's computer. He speaks to them through text on the screen and helps them in their endeavors. Loft finishes their analysis on the mysterious yellow liquid and reports that it's cerebral fluid. That's not all. It contains microscopic brain parasites. These must be what affects the abductees' behavior. The dean nabs girls, injects them with parasites, lets them go, the parasites turn them into party girls, and then the dean grabs them again for some unknown reason. Later, Perry comes in asking for Susan, who she thinks is playing a prank on her, because they suddenly vanished, and there is only a lazily made official document, in multiple choice, stating that the dean has abducted them as punishment for Laura's meddling. Both Perry and the dean misgender LaFontaine, and Laura is again silent on the matter. A few days later, Loft shows up, not remembering the abduction, but having recorded it. Now they have an idea where victims are being brought, underneath the Lustig Theater Hall. As time passes, LaFontaine gets increasingly loopy, like they're drunk, and Perry takes care of them. This is very similar to a plot point in Buffy Season 5, where the season's main antagonist, Glory, feeds on Tara's mental energy, after which she mentally degrades into a scared childlike personality, and Willow takes care of her until Glory can be defeated. LaFontaine even rambles about needing to go to the party, like Tara rambles about needing to go serve Glory. It serves the same plot function of increasing tension with a damsel in distress figure and adding a ticking clock. Whatever must be done soon. But did you really have to rip off Buffy? Carmilla examines a Sumerian book and finds a reference to Lofiformes, the light that devours. To witches sacrifice specific anointed virgins whose world has narrowed to the celebration.
There's no way for you to fight this. No spell for you to write this. No way for you to hide from the demon of the light.
This is what the Dean has been doing with the young women that she has had Carmilla lure. Sacrifice them to a bigger monster.
There's always a bigger fish.
All that's known about it so far is that it takes the form of a bright white light. Though if you're a huge nerd, you might recognize that Lofiformes is the scientific name of the anglerfish, the female morph of which lures its prey with a light, hinting at what lies behind the light. Lofiformes, or Lofi as she's called in Season 2, is the source of the white light dreams. And in theory, she is responsible for the full dream with the blood suffocation, and Elle is a trapped soul in Lofi's essence who shows up as well, but that doesn't quite work with Carmilla teasing Laura using explicit details she shouldn't be able to know about, and it coming from Carmilla's own trauma. I suspect this is the result of two drafts clumsily merged together, one with Carmilla causing nightmares, and one with Lofi being the exclusive nightmare maker. Just go with it! The only suspected way to kill Lofi is to use a certain sword in an ocean cave, inaccessible to humans, but accessible to vampires. Even though Carmilla is more or less a villain, she likes Laura enough to be willing to engage in some heroic vampire bullshit, and promises to retrieve the sword. Unfortunately, the Dean plants a cursed necklace in the room, and when Laura puts it on, the Dean possesses her to attempt to murder JP, crushing his external hard drive, and threaten Carmilla, making a deal with her to sacrifice Kirsch in place of Laura. She'll allow Carmilla to keep Laura as a pet. Hi, vampire kink. But only if Carmilla doesn't interfere with her plans. Unable to stand up to her mother, Carmilla agrees to sabotage Laura's efforts to subvert the Dean's sacrifice to Lofi. It almost works, except that we can see this, so it's on Laura's webcam. Duh! So, after the Dean leaves, Laura and pals learn what happened. Feeling betrayed, Laura dismisses Carmilla to deal with the Dean on their own. Just like in Buffy with Tara, they use Loft's insistence on going to the party to find their way to the sacrifice ritual. What follows is an epic battle with fighting vampires, zombies, the Dean, Lofi, the dramatic reunion of Elle and Carmilla rescuing Laura in panther form, turning back into a vampire, delivering a cheeky line, and then sacrificing herself to kill Lofi to save Laura, the Dean falling to her presumed death like the evil queen in Snow White. That we don't see at all and have to hear about after the fact. Yeah. This really stretches the playstyle exposition past its limit. That kind of drama needs to be shown, not told. And this framing device should be incidental. There is effectively no climax in Season 1. At least after this, they learn their lesson, as the other series' climaxes actually take place on screen. Well, Laura fell in love with Carmilla, and now she feels the deep pain of her loss. And this is where, if you're new to the series, the fandom would insist, you stop and read a fan art piece by Marine Lai. I think that's the pronunciation. A comic beginning with the line, "How is Laura?" It depicts Laura's grief at Carmilla's death, sobbing in bed, only to be greeted by Carmilla's return. They hug and talk and share a romantic evening, only for Laura to wake up and realize that Carmilla is still gone. It does a really good job of tugging at the heartstrings. So if you ever want to troll the fan community, just inquire, how is Laura? I'll do you one better. Why is Laura? While Laura mourns Carmilla, Betty complains about how she hates Silas. Her real personality is actually quite obnoxious.
Why is there blood in the milk container? What is wrong with you people?
Noob. Kirsch finds Carmilla still undead, not all dead, so Danny carries her home and Laura revives her with blood. They finally share a romantic kiss after Carmilla drank blood. Ew. Elise Bowman added an improvisation. Carmilla kisses her and then Laura kisses her back. I think this was a good decision. After all the dominance play, it's probably for the best to negate that with a clear choice on Laura's part, emphasizing her agency. Jennifer's Body did a similar thing, with Needy choosing to kiss Jennifer to make it clear that she's not just being jerked around by the sexy dominant monster. Even with the kinky sex appeal of the vampire genre, if you want to portray a legitimate romance, it is a good idea to draw from the dynamics of real-world BDSM, where the submissive partner always, in the end, has the real power. Suddenly, sirens blare and LaFontaine tells them that they need to run for the hills. Carmilla didn't actually kill Lofi, she just wounded the light organ, the Eska, and effectively fed the Dean to Lofi when she fell into the cavern. Now Lofi has the power to actually rise from the depths of the underworld. They've traded a powerful vampire enemy for an anglerfish the size of Godzilla. They all make a run for it as Season 1 comes to a close. Carmilla Season 1 is far from perfect. The static frame can get old, the exposition style doesn't work in a film medium, the Buffy references are overdone, the use of torture as a plot device is treated uncritically, Laura slut-shames Carmilla, Carmilla uses the ableist slur spaz at one point, Ellen Simpson has apologized for this, and the general treatment of LaFontaine as a non-binary person is transphobic. However, these flaws are minimal compared to what the show offers as a queer feminist supernatural romance drama. It offers amazing lesbian representation in a genre show, making it essentially Buffy for queer girls. And its adaptation of LaFontaine's Carmilla turns a conservative horror story about the danger of lesbians into a progressive queer-positive romance about the struggles of women, and not women, in a fight with a bunch of monsters, many of which themselves are female. The series was actually sponsored by You by Kotex as a vehicle for marketing menstrual products to the teenage girl demographic. Various shots of Laura's dorm room show Kotex boxes as product placement, and Ellen Simpson wrote a series of bonus promotional videos featuring the characters that lean heavily on marketing Kotex products.
Vampires get their periods. I've had nearly 4,000 of them, which is about as pleasant as it sounds. 4,000!
Even if it doesn't make a whole lot of sense that vampires get periods, I have to appreciate that such an important aspect of the lives of women is treated so frankly. We don't have jokes about boys being grossed out, as in Buffy, or references to vampires being turned off by dead blood, as with Twilight. Reportedly, the actresses joked a lot about Carmilla going down on Laura during her period.
It was announced recently that a popular web series about a lesbian vampire will be turned into a feature film.
A lesbian vampire is just like a regular vampire, except she loves having sex when you're on your period.
The videos treat menstruation as something important for women to discuss, in line with the feminist theme, and the show's product placement is subtle and adds to the mise-en-scène. However, there are a couple issues. Transgender men took offense at the Kotex videos for portraying menstruation as an exclusively female experience, not referencing trans men or using gender-neutral labels like people who menstruate. Considering that Carmilla will feature a non-binary character, you would expect them to be more trans-inclusive in their menstruation discussions. Ellen Simpson addressed this on her blog, saying that Kotex has a brand and restricted what she could write. It points to Kotex being transphobic there. Another problem that I personally have with the promos is that Laura demonstrates a pad's absorption with what is supposed to be grape soda, the label being a shout out to Doctor Who, and it doesn't look that different from the standard clinical blue liquid used in TV commercials, instead of something that looks like blood. If there was ever an excuse to use blood in a menstrual pad commercial, it's in a vampire show. She could grab the soy milk container. That's an actual part of the show. However, despite Laura's feminist preaching about how natural and unshameful menstruation is, Kotex apparently thinks that viewers will have a strong reaction of disgust if they see an accurate representation of it. Yes, Laura pouring blood implied to be from someone that Carmilla murdered onto her cereal is perfectly fine, but menstrual blood is considered obscene. It derives from deep cultural misogyny. Whatever progression that the series shows from the novella, it still clings to this fundamental idea that women's bleeding is unclean.
And I saw Carmilla, standing near the foot of my bed in her white nightdress, bathed from her chin to her feet, in one great stain of blood.
There's also a fun role reversal video where Elise Bowman and Natasha Negovanlys switch characters and joke around. We get a good look at that black smoke effect that makes tying her up make no sense, but it's still a fun effect. Negovanlys' Laura shows exaggerated naivety, and Bowman's Carmilla exaggerates her sexy dominance.
I'm Carmilla. I'm your new roommate. Sweetie pie, cream puff, other edible things.
Oh God, she's so sexy.
In the show, Carmilla gives Laura a number of somewhat condescending nicknames. Certainly the predator-prey dynamic comes up a bit, but it's mostly about Carmilla asserting dominance in general.
Buckle up, cream puff.
The Carmilla fan community locked onto the nickname Cream Puff and started describing themselves as Cream Puffs. You know, like Star Trek has Trekkers and Doctor Who has Whovians. The Season 1 credits contain a shout-out to Cream Puffs, official merchandise carries the label, and the film teaser trailer has Carmilla give Laura a box of Cream Puffs as a reference.
My cream puffs! Merci.
Yeah, your overpriced cream puffs.
The fact that the fandom's name comes from a vampire's domination effort raises a few eyebrows, but it's not super degrading, and it functions more or less as a top me meme, defining the community and lesbian attraction to the sexy dominant monster at the heart of the series. The delightfully fluffy nature of the food item also gives the fandom a girly aesthetic appropriate to a series about respecting young women. Those who would find that degrading miss a fundamental point of the show. Carmilla came on the scene during a dearth of good lesbian genre content. Lost Girl was on the air, but it was petering out. Wynonna Earp and Supergirl were still pretty far off. The 100 had yet to introduce the Clark-Lexa romance. And here came Carmilla, with its strong, respectful focus on young women, and not women, fighting vampires, and engaging in a Twilight-esque romance just for the lesbians. It hit its niche, and it flourished. As Negovanlys puts it, it was the
little web series that could.
And it led to a whole movie. Even with all the flaws of Season 1, it still represents a strong feminist series. It is one of my favorite shows, and I highly recommend it. Please like, share, subscribe, and consider donating to my Patreon. Pledges of $2 or more will earn you an explicit thank you at the end of each video. Thank you.